Thanks for joining us. On today's show, we'll be talking about rolling your 401k into an IRA. And Dustin, when someone leaves their previous employer, that's when you hear about it most. Is that when they usually roll over that 401k?
That is one of the times that I would recommend. And anytime that you can roll over your 401k, we always recommend, I'm not going to say always, we generally will recommend going ahead and rolling that to an IRA. And mainly because, I mean, while you're accumulating, you're during your working years, you're accumulating assets, trying to save money. Mutual funds are probably the best option if you're, putting money in every month. But once you get 50s, 55, 60 years old, now your goals have changed. You're no longer trying to save and be as aggressive as you once were. And a lot of times 401ks may have 10 or 12 different funds. And then as a safe option, they may have a bond fund or they may have a money market. But that may not be the best thing to use when you're trying to be safe with the money either. It can be. It's probably going to miss out on some of the growth that you'd like to see.
It's not very specific to the individual.
Right. So if you can roll it to an IRA, the whole world is your option. So
and it's really, you get more control over it that way as well. Instead of just having the choices that your employer pick from, you can invest the money in basically anything.
So you said rolling it over. When other times might I think about that?
Well, once you reach 59 and a half years old, a lot of people don't realize this, but there's an option called an in-service rollover. And what that means is you're going to keep the plan in service because you're contributing, you're still working, you want your match. But what they allow you to do is most companies will allow you to roll it over into an IRA once you reach 59 and a half.
Now, really, most companies will let you do that?
I would say a significant amount of companies.
Wow.
I wouldn't say most, but there are a lot of companies that will allow that.
Yeah, what you have to do is check with your human resources department. If you have one, if it's a smaller company, you might not have that. But whoever you go to make changes on your 401k, or 403B, or to get enrolled in the plan, if you go to them and ask them, are we allowed to do an in-service rollover or an in-service distribution, then they should know what that terminology or what that language means and should be able to tell you yes or no if it's allowed. It's up to the employer when they establish that retirement plan if they were going to allow that to happen. So sometimes individuals will have 401ks with Fidelity or with Vanguard, and they kind of think they've set the rules, and that's not how it works. It's actually the employer that sets the rules.
And on that point, where they may have a 401k at Vanguard, they may have one at their employer they worked at 20 years ago, and they may have a 403b at another company that they work for. A lot of times people feel like that's diversification and that they've got all these different assets working together. But just because you have several accounts doesn't necessarily mean that you have diversification. And what you want to do there is you could typically consolidate those accounts over into one IRA and then start planning for retirement or planning for whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and one of the risks that we come across, fortunately it's rare, but it's pretty painful when it happens, but a lot of people don't realize that if you have, like Dustin just mentioned, a 401k from a previous employer, and you've left it there for years, you just kind of forgot about it, you get a statement on it every once in a while. Let's say something happened to that company, and we would hope nothing ever would, but let's say something did. We saw this a lot during the financial crisis. Let's say that company were to have to file bankruptcy at some point. Most people don't realize it, though. If that were to happen, the assets that you would have in that 401k plan at that time would then be frozen. Okay, so you don't lose the assets, but you can't do anything with them. If you wanted to roll them over, you can't. If you needed to take a withdrawal, you cannot do that. If you wanted to change how the money was invested within the 401k, you cannot do that. The money is basically just stuck there until the bankruptcy proceedings are finished. And that can sometimes take years. So if someone's closer into retirement, it's not the best place to have their money is at their previous employer. If their previous employer is maybe beginning to fall on some hard times, sometimes we know it, sometimes we don't until it's too late. You don't want to get caught in that trap. We saw some of that during the financial crisis where individuals thought, hey, I'm going to be okay, I've got all this money in this 401k, I can get my hands on it whenever I need to since I no longer work at that company. The company then filed bankruptcy and they couldn't touch the money for years. So it's really a big issue. Another big reason why we recommend just rolling money over to an IRA when you're given that opportunity.
And I think sometimes the retirement kind of sneaks up on you, and you've had your 401k going for a while. So even before, long before, say a decade before you might retire, is a good time to go in and look at this and what you're going to do with this money. Correct?
Absolutely. Some companies don't even make you wait till 59 and a half. That's kind of a general rule of thumb, but sometimes some companies will just allow at any time to do an in-service rollover. So it's always just important to understand the rules and understand how your plan works, because each one of them are going to be a little bit different.
And not only for yourself, Melissa, but it's also better for your heirs and beneficiaries to inherit an IRA versus a 401k. Again, 401ks can sometimes be very restrictive. The rules and what you can and can't do with that money is really set and established by your previous employer. And some people are okay with that and other people not so much, right? So it's better for heirs and beneficiaries to inherit an IRA and not a 401k. An IRA, you set the rules. You set what happens to that money if something happens to you. It's not up to the standard rules or the standard plan that your previous employer had for you. So,
And can everyone have an IRA? Are there any exceptions to that?
No, you're allowed to have an IRA. Now, some people can't take the deduction, which is one of the benefits, but yeah, anyone can open an IRA.
and we're talking a lot about 401ks, but what we're sharing here today really applies to 401ks, but the same thing can be said for 403bs. If you work for the federal government, you would have a thrift savings plan, a TSP. You know, some will work for local governments. It really is any type of employer plan that you have at a company you no longer work at, or in some cases like Dustin's mentioning, if you still work there, once you start to establish a significant amount of money in these types of plans, you really are better off exploring options and seeing if you can get that money rolled over to an IRA, because it's going to typically save you money and fees. You're going to be able to pick better, more diversified investments, and then it's going to be better for your heirs and beneficiaries, and then you protect the money if something ever happens to that previous employer as well.
So what I'm hearing here today is if you've got a 401k, that's great, and you should be contributing to that
to it,
because
sure.
it's free money.
Yeah.
And but you don't necessarily need to stay with it.
Yeah, if I were to summarize it, if you're not, if you are no longer at your previous employer, then I don't think your money should be there either.
That's right.
That's a good way to summarize
That's
it.
a good point. All right. Thank you very much. And if you would like more information about rolling your 401k into an IRA, you can visit swdgroup.com. And stay tuned for more Strategic Wealth with Matt Dicken right after the break.
Really what we're talking about here is it's really not how much you have when you go into retirement, but how much you get to keep after paying your taxes. Now, when it comes to investing, I really believe one of the biggest decisions that you have that you can make is how is your account going to be treated from a tax standpoint. You know, we've been helping individuals in our office for many, many years, and one of the things that we found is that more often than not, individuals will underestimate the impact of taxes on their investments. Now, everybody has a choice to make. When you invest money in some sort of a retirement or investment account, moving forward, the government's going to treat that money one of three ways. It's either going to be in a taxable environment, a tax-deferred environment, or a tax-free environment. And to illustrate the differences, I want to walk you through a real quick example of growing money each of these three different ways. And we'll use a real simple example. Let's say that we took $1, and let's assume that hypothetically we could double the value of the dollar every single year over a 20-year period. If we're growing that money in a tax-free environment, then that dollar at the end of the 20 years is going to be worth just over $1 million. So again, if you double it every year for 20 years in a tax-free environment, you should have just over $1 million. Now, what happens to the same dollar if we put it into a taxable environment? Like many of our viewers right now, you may have some money invested in a taxable mutual fund or taxable savings account or stock account, something of that nature. Now, again, in this example, we're going to double the money every single year for 20 years, but because it's in a taxable environment, we're going to have to pay some taxes on the growth out of the account each year. And we'll assume that you're in a 28% tax bracket because that's the national average for taxpayers. At the end of the 20 years, if we're doubling the dollar every year in a taxable environment, instead of over $1 million, we're going to be left with just $57,000 at the end of this 20-year period. Basically, what happens here is the taxes that you have to pay along the way, that they're robbing you of the compounding interest. You didn't have as much money in the account every year for the 20 years to double. That's why you're left with a lot less. Now, the third way we could grow the dollar, of course, is in a tax-deferred environment. And the way that would work is we put $1 into a tax-deferred account, and it doubled every year for 20 years. At the end of the 20 years, we'll have over $1 million, right? Just like the tax-free account, but we'll have it still in the account. If we want to take it out of the account, we're going to have to pay some taxes on it. When we do that, after paying the tax bill, we would probably be left with around $600,000. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. So growing your money tax-deferred is obviously a lot better than taxable, but still isn't nearly as good as growing your money tax-free. So, and really what we're talking about here is it's really not how much you have when you go into retirement, but how much you get to keep after paying your taxes. So some tax-free options that you would have available to you that you should really use. If you're like most individuals right now, and you have the majority of your money in either taxable accounts or tax-deferred accounts like IRAs or 401ks, 403bs, you want to start putting future contributions in most cases, or maybe doing some conversions with as many dollars as you possibly can over into the tax-free environment. It's going to have a dramatic impact on how much money you can spend and enjoy as you go into retirement. So some tax-free options that you have available right now, of course, most will have a Roth IRA that they can contribute to. Now, there are some income limitations, meaning if you make too much money or no money at all, then you cannot use a Roth IRA. But for most of our viewers watching right now, Roth IRA will still be a viable option. You can use that for both yourself and your spouse. So if you're under age 50, you can put $5,500 per year into the plan. Over age 50, you can put up to $6,500 per year into the plan, and that's for each individual. So a couple could, if you're over age 50, you could put as much as $13,000 a year into the Roth IRA. That money will then, of course, grow tax-free moving forward. If you're not eligible for the Roth, or you've already contributed to the Roth and you would like to save even more money, then certain municipal bonds might be a good option. Here there are no income limitations. There are no contribution limits, so you can put as much money as you want to into a municipal bond. Different municipal bonds have different degrees of safety. So before investing in a municipal bond, you want to make sure that it's going to be a revenue-backed bond or has some sort of guaranteed protection, something of that nature, but may be a very nice option for some. And then certain insurance strategies are available where you can put money into different types of plans. That money will grow tax-free, and you can take the money out tax-free. Again, not everybody will qualify for those plans, so you have to work with an advisor to see which option would work best for you. One area that I always encourage individuals to inquire about is if you have a Roth 401k option through your employer. This is what we have at our company, Strategic Wealth Designers, that a lot of our employees participate in, and that's a Roth 401k. So it works just like your traditional 401k, but obviously you're going to be putting money into it after tax, but then the money that goes into the Roth portion is going to grow tax-free. When you retire, you can take the money out and not owe any additional taxes on that. What's really nice here is there are no income limitations for the Roth 401k, so no matter how much money you make, there's no limitations like you have with the Roth IRA. And then obviously the contribution limits are going to be much, much higher on a 401k. So some of our viewers watching right now could put about $20,000 into their Roth 401k. So obviously a much larger contribution than what's available through the Roth IRA. If you have a Roth 401k through your employer and you're not currently utilizing it, in a lot of cases we'll recommend that you make that change. Go ahead and make future contributions towards the Roth portion so you'll have at least some money that you'll be able to access once you go into retirement completely tax-free. But again, like we mentioned earlier, this is probably one of the biggest decisions that individuals have that they need to make. You know, whether you get a little higher rate of return or can cut your fees a little bit, all those things add up and matter, but they'll really pale in comparison as far as how much you're going to owe in taxes in the future. That's really the biggest decision that you really need to be focusing on. So if you have questions or you're not sure what the best direction is to go in order to grow your money in a tax-free environment, then feel free to give us a call at the office, or as always, you can get more information from our website. So you're paying the advisor to manage the account and watch over it for you. He or she, though, has hired different mutual fund managers to run whatever portion of the portfolio they're going to be running for you, and you have to pay them a fee as well.
WHAS 11 salutes Strategic Wealth Designers as a leading retirement and wealth management firm in Kentuckiana. The advisors at Strategic Wealth Designers have been helping retirees and pre-retirees live a safe and stress-free retirement since 2002.
Welcome back. We're going to spend some time talking now about double dip accounts and what that means and whether or not you can tell if you have one.
So hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about double dip accounts and what that really means. And Matt, you want to spend some time talking about how you can tell whether or not you have a double dip account?
Yeah, so what we're referring to here, Dustin, is some individuals watching right now are going to have money invested in mutual funds, potentially, but they'll also have an advisor that they're working with on that account that they go to for advice, and he or she may be charging a annual management fee or advisory fee or whatever it is that they're referring to it as. And when that happens, that's what a double dip account is.
Okay.
So you're paying the advisor to manage the account and watch over it for you, He or she, though, has hired different mutual fund managers to run, whatever portion of the portfolio they're going to be running for you, and you have to pay them a fee as well.
I'm confused. Isn't the reason you would hire an advisor to manage your account is so that they would manage your account?
So they would manage the account. Yeah,
So-
that's kind of the point, right?
Yeah, so you're paying someone to pay someone else then to pay or to
Right,
manage the
right.
account.
There's the double dip.
Yeah.
And the reason why we're talking about it here today is because the fees and expenses can be enormous,
Yeah.
right, and have a dramatic impact. We're not talking about a small impact over time. We're talking about a dramatic impact. A typical mutual fund is going to have fees of somewhere between 1% to 3% per year.
Right.
Let's say it's 1.5%, just to use an example. Well, if you're paying an advisor, typical advisor fee is 1% to 2%.
Right.
So let's say that the advisor is charging 1.5%. We'll just split the difference. When you add the fees together, you're at 3%.
Yeah.
So on a $100,000 account, as an example, that's $3,000
Yeah.
that you're paying in fees. Over a 10-year period, that's $30,000 that you'll lose. Now, most viewers are going to have more than $100,000 in their account, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you have $1 million. If you're paying 3% in fees because you're using mutual funds and an advisor to watch those mutual funds over a 10-year period, that means you could lose $300,000
Right.
in fees and expenses. And with individuals living longer and longer, most people are going to have a retirement that lasts more than 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So you could pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees over time.
But I'm sure there's some viewers that are probably saying to themselves right now, well, my advisor would have to tell me. I'm only paying 1% because he told me I was paying 1%. They can't get away with that, right?
Well, when your advisor says you're paying me 1%,
Right.
well, that may be all that the advisor is collecting. So technically that's true, right,
Right.
in that scenario. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the mutual funds are doing their job for free.
Right.
Right? So the fees that they're charging, your advisor may or may not be benefiting from that. In most cases, they're probably not, but you still have to pay them. So if you ask the question, what are my fees? A lot of times the advisor will tell you what their fee is.
Right.
But you have to dig down a little further. And when you ask the question, you don't want to know part of the fees. What you're really looking for,
all every dollar.
You want to know all of the fees. And that's why years ago we created the Strategic Wealth Report, which is a report that any of our viewers can contact us and request from us, where we will show you exactly what the fees and expenses are that you're paying in your portfolio. We'll split out what you're paying your advisor, but then we'll also add up and show you what you're paying to the mutual fund companies.
Yeah.
And obviously we'll add everything together and show you the true cost of what you're paying.
What are some of the fees? I mean, with mutual funds, you can have 3 or 4 or 5 different fees going on?
So typical mutual fund is going to have a management fee.
Yeah.
But you're also going to have a turnover cost or a trading cost. Now what that is, a lot of people aren't aware of this. A lot of advisors, Dustin, aren't aware that mutual funds have this
Really?
fee. So basically what a turnover or trading cost is, the fund manager, he or she buys a collection of stocks or bonds, and they don't typically just sit on them, right? They're managing it.
Right.
So he or she is buying and selling different funds or bonds or different stocks or bonds through the year within the fund. And every time that they do that, there's a fee
Okay.
for that. And the fee for it is usually about 1%. So not to get too technical here today, but if you go to a place like Morningstar,
Yeah.
you can look up your mutual fund. It'll show you the turnover percentage.
Yeah.
And that's the percentage of the portfolio that's been bought and sold
Okay.
over the past year. You multiply that percentage by 1%, plus the management fee, plus the advisory fee,
Plus the
maybe
12B1 fee,
12B1
plus the-
fee or
Yeah.
account fee or
Yeah.
annual fee. When you add all those things together, that's how you end up getting your true cost.
Yeah. So how important do you think it is to know what your costs are? I mean,
Well, when we're talking about like the generic example we were just mentioning, I mean, when we're talking about individuals or couples being able to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars
Yeah.
over the course of their retirements, I think it's extremely important. I think that having money invested in these double dip accounts that we like to refer to them as really can mean the difference between having a successful retirement
Yeah.
or struggling at some point in the future. You know, when individuals start to struggle in their retirements, if they had a couple extra $100,000, an extra $400,000 or something like that, that would go a long way,
Yeah.
right? Because they usually start to struggle later in life, where they don't necessarily need as much money to live on because they're not as active, they're not doing as many things. But if they paid unnecessary fees over a 10, 20, 30, 40-year period, that money could potentially be gone. And it sure would be nice had they had it.
Yeah.
Now, not all advisory accounts or situations where you're paying an advisor to manage the account are double dip accounts. What we're talking about specifically is if you're paying your advisor some sort of an annual or quarterly fee, and then he or she is using mutual funds, that's where you're going to get into the double dip scenario. If your advisor is not using mutual funds, if they're using things like individual stocks or bonds, maybe some ETFs or other types of investments where there's not going to be any ongoing fee, well then that's not a double dip account.
Okay.
But more often than not, when we see individuals investing with an advisor, probably their investment of choice then within the account is going to be mutual funds.
And just so the viewers understand that, let's say the market was flat for the year, and it didn't really do anything, but the advisor plus the mutual fund fee was 3%. Does that mean that they didn't have to pay the fee that way?
No, they don't waive the fee, right? So that means if the stock market is flat, but you paid 3% in fees, that means you would lose 3%.
Okay.
Another way of looking at it is it really hurts your performance over time. Let's say that the stock market has a good year, and the market is up 10%. Well, you're going to probably grow by about 7%, right, because of the fees. So you had a significant haircut there. If the stock market goes down by 10%, you're probably not going to just lose 10 because of all the fees. You're not going to lose 13%. So what these double dip accounts really end up doing to the value of your portfolio over time is it kind of acts like a major anchor. It holds you back. When the market grows, you don't grow as much because of the high fees. Then when the market loses value, you lose more because of the high fees. And that's why over a long period of time, it can be detrimental to one's retirement plans.
Okay. So if you're currently using mutual funds and you're working with an advisor, give us a call at our office and we'll be able to run a strategic wealth report for you and total up what your fees and expenses are from a dollar standpoint and a percentage standpoint. We look forward to hearing from you. Now it's not necessarily how much risk are we going to take, how much can we grow this portfolio. Now the objectives are, how do we keep this money?
WHAS 11 salutes Strategic Wealth Designers as a leading retirement and wealth management firm in Kentuckiana. The advisors at Strategic Wealth Designers have been helping retirees and pre-retirees live a safe and stress-free retirement since 2002.
Welcome back. I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about a couple that came into the office here recently that I think a lot of people could relate to. This couple, I'm going to name them Bob and Terry. They were both 64 years old and they had been working for 30, 35 plus years, and they had accumulated this nice nest egg that they were thinking about transitioning into retirement. So what they were doing is they wanted to come in and talk to me. It was their first time actually meeting with a financial advisor, and they wanted to talk to me about how could I help them to reallocate their investment options into something that's geared a little more towards retirement. They had both been in one of the target date funds that was, I think that it was a target date 2020 fund. And what that means is typically it's a mutual fund that's set up for someone that should be retiring in the year 2020. So that's called a target date fund. So both Bob and Terry had a target date 2020 fund, and they came in to see me because they still see every month the value of their accounts going up and down with the market. So they said, Dustin, we just don't feel like this investment portfolio fits what our needs are anymore. It's helped them to gather this nice nest egg that accumulated a little over $1 million, and they wanted to really make sure that money was there in 2 or 3 years once they were actually going to go ahead and move that into retirement. So they brought in their different investment options, and both 401ks had about 20 or maybe 22 different options inside of their 401ks. So what I was doing is I was going through and I was looking at what are the fees going on inside of those mutual funds. I was looking at the level of risk that each one of those mutual funds had, and what I found was that the majority of the mutual funds in both of their portfolios were geared towards one thing, and that's growth. Typically, I mean, any 401k plan that's out there is usually set up to help the employees to save enough money to retire. Well, once you get close to retirement, your goals are going to change. Now it's not necessarily how much risk are we going to take, how much can we grow this portfolio. Now the objectives are, how do we keep this money? We've worked our lives to accumulate this nest egg. How do we wrap our arms around that money and make sure it's there 20, 30 years from now? So after I studied all their different options, I let them know what I found, and I said, hey, you know, you've either got a money market account, which is basically almost like sitting in cash. I mean, it may earn a 0.5%, or if you're lucky, 0.75%. So it was one of those, or maybe a couple of different bond funds that they had. Now, bond funds, we'll typically use those as a diversifying tool, but what's happened are bond funds are highly interest rate sensitive. And what I mean by that is you can kind of think of bond funds and interest rates like they're on a teeter-totter. And what happens when interest rates go down, that causes bond funds to go up in value. When interest rates go up, that causes bond funds to go down in value. Well, if you think about it right now, interest rates, I know they went up a little bit, but interest rates are still right around all-time lows. I mean, they're very, very low if you look at historical averages. So guess where that puts bond funds? That puts them right around their all-time highs. Matter of fact, if you're holding bond funds, this recent interest rate hike that we saw probably caused those funds to lose a little bit of money. So right now is not necessarily the time to use a bond fund as your safety net. So when I look through their portfolio, I found they've got either growth mutual funds, they've got a money market account, which is basically like sitting in cash, and then they had a bond fund account, which right now is still sitting around their peak. So they're much more likely to go down in value than they are to go up in value at this point. So that's not going to be something we want to use as our safety net. So what we did is we went ahead and called both of their employers, and we asked if their plan would allow for something called an in-service rollover. And what that means, what an in-service rollover is, since they both wanted to work for another 2 or 3 or maybe 4 years, they didn't want to go ahead and close their 401k plan because they're getting a match. Both of them were getting a 4 or 5, I can't recall now, 4 or 5% match from their employers. So they definitely didn't want to give that up. So we called and we found out that their plan allows that in-service rollover, where they keep that plan in service, keep funding it for the next 3 or 4 years, getting their match, but they allowed us to roll over the balance of that 401k into an IRA plan. Now, when this happens, when you roll it to an IRA, there's not going to be any taxes due. There's not going to be anything that happens that's negatively going to impact the 401k. What it does is it allows your investment options to go much, much more broad. Now they're not limited to those 20 or 22 different investments that we were looking at. Now they can start really setting this portfolio up so that they're going to have some guaranteed results throughout their retirement. What that allowed them to do is really reduce the level of risk, reduce the level of fees, and start generating some income-producing assets that they can leverage throughout their retirements. So if you're currently contributing into a 401k plan, that is great. That's certainly better than not having anything at all. But you definitely want to check with your employer just so that you understand your options, understand what you're allowed to do with your 401k and what you're not allowed to do. Because it's certainly, if you're within 5 to 10 years of retirement, you want to start thinking about some other options. So give us a call at our office if you have any questions about this topic.